Hi everyone, my name is Katie, and I will be talking about the literary techniques that can be found in Men on the Moon by Simon Ortiz. There are many literary techniques and devices, and Ortiz does a really good job at integrating them into the story. Frankly, I could probably do an entire presentation just talking about the literary devices in this story, but there isn't enough time for that, so I will choose the ones that I found stood out most to me and that really defined and added to the story. So, firstly, I want to talk about the symbolism in the story. I included three different examples of symbolism that I found. The first one that I identified was the moon itself. So, in Indigenous culture, the moon is a very powerful and spiritual symbol. It represents many things, such as guidance, time, balance, protection, and various other values or ideas. So, it's essentially a very important and almost sacred symbol to many indigenous populations, and it's very valued and respected. So I think that Ortiz contrasted this symbol with how the moon is seen and treated in American culture. So as we see in the story, the moon is seen more as a territory for the Americans to conquer and to exploit and use for their own benefit. It doesn't belong to them yet. They still want to conquer it. And so I think that this contrast is really important, and it really shows how the moon is seen and treated in such different ways um, with these two populations and cultures. The next symbolism that I wanted to talk about was the wrestling matches. So the wrestling matches, there are two in the story. They happen once in the beginning and once at the end of the story. And they are between an indigenous fighter and an American fighter. And so I understood these wrestling matches as sort of a symbol for the indigenous struggle to assert their identity and their existence in the face of centuries of colonization. Um, and I think that the the element of the Apache fighter winning the wrestling match sort of adds a bit of hopefulness by depicting indigenous resilience and perseverance in the face of colonization and assimilation um, that indigenous people have been experiencing for centuries, and even complete denial of their existence as a people. So I think that these wrestling matches are small details that I think really that are really symbolic and add to the message of the story. The final symbolism that I found is the dream. And so the dream itself is a symbol. It has symbolism within it and various other literary techniques within it. But I decided to focus on the dream as a whole and what it symbolizes. So the two boys in the dream encounter this unfamiliar machine, or as it's called in the story, a machina. And this encounter is very confusing and strange for them, and even for the animals who are around. They're scared, and they're not exactly sure how to react to this object that they've never seen before. And so I think that this dream and this scene is a symbol of the grandfather's feelings towards technology and advancements in technology. He's very skeptical and apprehensive about the moon landing and rocket ships and all this new technology, and he's almost fearful about it. I think the fact that this is coming up in his dream. He watched the moon landing. He watched the moon take off, actually, sorry, the day before, and then he had a dream about it. So I think that this shows that he had some underlying fears surrounding these new progressions with technology, and I think that's very symbolic. So I'm going to move on to the imagery and personification that I found. within the story. The story and the writing is very descriptive. There's a lot of imagery throughout, but I found there's this one excerpt or quote from the story that I found included both imagery and personification, and that's when the Apollo rocket ship is taking off. And so it says, "The white smoke became furious, and a muted rumble shook through the TV. The rocket was trembling, and the voice was trembling." So I found that this was a very descriptive quote, which is why I included it. The first sentence of this quote has a lot of visual and auditory imagery. It sort of gives the reader the sense that they're actually there experiencing it and watching it themselves. And the second part, where it says the rocket was trembling and the voice was trembling, it incorporates some personification. The rocket and the voice are being personified, and we can really feel the scene and feel what's going on here. Finally, I think that this story is an allegory itself. I think that the central idea and the central topic of the moon landing is an allegory for colonial expansion, and more specifically, I think it is an allegory for America's attempt to claim and conquer land that is not theirs and that doesn't belong to them and use it for their own benefit. And I think this reflects and mirrors centuries of European expansion on indigenous lands and the assimilation and colonialism that the indigenous populations endured. And I think that as an indigenous writer, this is very personal and important for Ortiz to express in his writing. And I think he does a really great job at expressing this very important message in a way that's also very captivating to read. So I really enjoyed the way that he incorporated these literary devices into his story. So that's it for the literary techniques. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.